We're back with another episode of the Youth Ministry Booster Podcast. Hang out in the garage with my friend Karen. That's such an underwhelming introduction. Hey, everybody, this is actually my wife, Karen.
Hi, y'all.
Making her podcast return. It's been a few years since we've had you on the podcast.
Yeah, and when I was on last time, were you even on the podcast?
I don't think so. I think we did the episode where it was like the wives of the podcast, and it was like you and Martha. And that was the whole funny bit.
I don't think you were actually on it.
Yeah.
It was me and Martha.
Yeah, I think it was like you were playing my role, and then Chad's wife Martha was playing his role, and so it was like the wives of the podcast. I don't know if we've ever actually had this here. We've done recordings for other things like church and life, but I don't know if we've ever done a youth ministry booster podcast in the garage together.
I know, this is so funny.
It's a little surreal. I'm not gonna lie, it's a little surreal. Like we had to like put the kids to bed. Like this is like one of the few podcasts that we're literally recording after 9 p.m. I mean, they usually get released after 9. They never are like recorded after 9. That's wild. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I definitely had to like make myself. I had to untired myself, getting them to bed, and it was like, oh gosh, this is normally when I am just like ready to go to sleep.
Done. I think I was half awake watching Monday Night Football. I don't know. Yeah. So
it's okay. While I was waiting for them to kind of fall asleep, I was finishing the latest episode of the Great British Baking Show.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
but that almost lulls you to sleep. So.
Just comfort shows all around. Yeah, we watch a lot of comfort TV. That's one of the things that I will say on this side of like 35 into 40 and parenting. TV is rarely like let's like just like watch an amazing bingey whatever kind of show.
Yeah.
It's more just like, let's just put something on in the background.
Yes. Like I think about before we had our kids, that we went through seasons. I know that when you were in seminary, if we had a couple of free weeks in the summertime,
a break from between classes,
like one of those
or between
very
papers.
rare moments of like,
yeah.
okay, Zach doesn't have class. I'm not teaching currently. I'm on summer break. We would pick a show and just watch so much TV.
Oh, at breakfast, at break, at dinner, there was so many, like, we watched Lost at like 7 and 8 a.m. with cereal trying to get caught up because we were one of those couples that like missed it on the first go around. And so we had to like binge it later.
It was all available. But y'all, that's a lot of TV to get through.
It's also a lot of Lost at one time.
It's an emotional roller coaster. And to put yourself through that kind of emotional roller coaster in a binge-worthy fashion, it's a lot. I can't.
Just seeing smoke dragons at night. Yeah.
No. And so now we're at the stage of life where, it's go, go, go during the day. The boys go to bed. And then what can I put on that is soothing and banal? Just like.
I actually look forward to you putting on Great British Baking.
Yeah, the Great British Baking Show.
You put it on and I just lay on the couch and just slumber. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to go wrong with pastries and people being kind to one another and speaking calmly to one another.
Just low stakes cooking. Yes. Just low stakes patisserie.
Well, and I'll tell you what, that added onto the weather that we have had this week of just like steady rain, which is actually why Chad, I think you were going to record with Chad today.
So we had this whole thing. Yeah.
But listen, y'all, we've had naders in November.
Right.
Here in Oklahoma, which is not ideal.
Yeah. Not planned, not ideal.
And not typical.
Yeah.
So Chad had to stay home with his precious kiddo today because school was canceled.
There was a threat of tornado.
Because of tornado threats. And that school's not the only one that had to call school today.
No.
There were a lot of schools across the state that were like, this is potentially too dangerous.
Yes.
We're shutting it down.
Well, so we had Chad back finally after a run of being gone. And so we had several planned that Chad was just going to be back on. Like he had some time away, was going to be back, but he literally has been back for one, and now he's dipped out, and he'll be gone for a few weeks. But that's fine. It's weather related. Chad's still well. We were going to have Karen play the Chadcation. Where do we think he went? But he was literally supposed to be back. So right now he's just at home. He's just working remote from home, hanging out, doing
Chad,
it. Yeah.
if you need something to do on these rainy evenings,
there you go.
May I recommend Great British Baking Show?
How many seasons are there? There's like 6 seasons?
So here's where I'm unclear is I think that what we have available to us here in the States, there are like 8 seasons, 9 seasons. Actually, it's probably more than that. But in terms of, I mean, British Bake Off has been happening for a long time. And so I think that there are even more seasons.
Imports on the way?
Yeah. Before it got really popular in the States, I think there's even more. I could be wrong about that, but there's a lot.
There's a lot.
Yep.
There's a lot happening.
Yep.
Well, and so that's one of the things. We had 2 big topics we wanted to talk about. This episode was going to come, but probably closer to the holidays, in kind of the thoughtfulness around like the holiday season in ministry, New Year's, and all the things. We know that Thanksgiving to New Year's in the life of a ministry family is, whether you planned for it or not, it's a lot. It's a lot going on because there is an increased demand on maybe ministry, but for sure the family calendar or school calendar, or just like there's just like 1,000 things to go to. And so we wanted to just kind of rally and talk a little bit with you about some of our practices as a family. We don't always get it right, but this was like our wisdom, and like it was going to be like, a true testimony. I wasn't just going to say things and have like, you wonder if Karen can back us up on
also,
the thing we're talking about.
I want to preface this part of the conversation by just saying, if any of this comes across as Pinteresty or any of that, that is not what this is. This is our attempt at sanity.
Yes, it is.
During the busy seasons that are inevitable in ministry and just in life.
Yeah. These are not just curious things. So Karen, high school educator for a number of years, youth ministry staffer for a number of years, always talking about teenagers and things in rhythm. So we have pretty much always had a family calendar, a church calendar, and a school calendar. And so one of the things that's always been really important is to lay those out on an annual basis and try to figure out where those things like line up and do. One of the best things about having you in my life when it came to ministry work is that it was like a really close ear to the ground on like school calendar stuff of like big tests and events and things or days off, or actually, hey, spring break's a year earlier this year. But one of the things that we have tried to embody the practice of is to not just like collate those for like big stuff, but on a weekly basis. Like we have like a family meeting most of the time on Sunday nights.
Yes.
That's just kind of our rhythm. And we are like laying it out like maps on the dining room table of like, here is our battle plan for this week. Like, yeah. So
big time. And that is so much. Part of that is this particular season of life that we're in. We've got stuff going on at church, and we've got 2 elementary school aged boys who are involved in activities now themselves. And we have things going on, and there are meetings, and there are different things happening. I do some volunteer work. And so there are just a lot of moving parts. Yeah. And I think that we definitely went through a season where we did not do this. Yeah. And everything always felt harried.
It was just managed via text of like, hey, can we do this or that?
And
that
it
was
literally was almost like day to day.
Yes,
it was like, oh, I didn't know you had that thing going on today.
Yeah.
I wish I would have known that you had that going on today.
We're making Tuesday night calls Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Yeah.
And it was too much. And I think that was a testament to just how busy we both were, but that we did not. I don't think we had the foresight to think through. Actually, if we got ourselves even a little bit organized, that this would save a lot of, I think, frenetic energy, stress, anything. So essentially what we do, and you said it on Sundays, we kind of call it the Sunday scaries.
Yes.
But we sit down, we have a
scary meaning like let's make our week less scary.
Yes.
Not Sunday is like boo scary,
right,
but like we make it less scary on Sundays.
Not looking at the week ahead with a sense of dread.
Yeah.
And like, oh, look how scary this is. But really thinking about how can we make this less scary for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we sit down. One thing that we have done is we created a shared calendar on our phones.
Yes.
That was a first really important big step.
Our family calendar, like we have a paper calendar that's kind of a week-to-week calendar. The family calendar for us is digital.
Yeah.
Like when things get added to the digital family calendar, whether that's a soccer game or a volunteer event or a church event, like if there's something already there, when you have to really, like it's a hard conversation of like, well, sorry, we already had this Tuesday night plan or whatever, like that is the veto calendar, like that the shared Google Calendar is the veto calendar. Well,
and we used to just have our own separate individual Google Calendars on
Foolish.
our phones. Foolish, especially when you have entered into life with another person, and then you have kids that you're trying to manage. So that was a first important big step, was coming up with that shared phone calendar, so that anytime that we add something, we make sure to add it to that family calendar so that the other person can see it. And there are definitely times when one of us will maybe not look at the phone calendar before we commit to something, and then it's like, not to name names or point fingers,
but to name names by pointing fingers.
No, but it happens. Again, it happens in the busyness of things, and you're trying to juggle all of these things. And so the shared phone calendar has been so helpful in having that kind of shared awareness of all that's going on. And then also, we started wanting to bring our boys into that process. And so I have a wall calendar that I found that is hanging up, and I update it on a weekly basis, and it's a day by day. Here are the things that we have going on. It also has a place for you to keep a prayer list for the people that you're praying for, to set goals for your week, to choose a word for the week. Now, do we fill out every one of those sections every week? No.
But a little dinner list of knowing what's coming, or like
list,
things to add to the shopping list. That one I love because the boys don't have phones, and so they don't have access. They don't have a bead on what's happening, but they can see. And Gideon is ours that, like, when we were going to go to the fair this fall, he wanted to make sure that fair day was on the family calendar.
Put the fair on the family calendar, please. And so we did.
He was counting it down. I
know. And honestly, like, I think that they kind of got to a point where, parents, I think, are typically making all the plans. And then we're just kind of like bringing them along for the ride. But I think,
get your shoes.
And they're like, where are we going? Why?
Get your shoes.
I'm comfortable here at home. I did not know that we had something coming up. And so this actually brings them into the process too, and makes it visible for them that they can, and the calendar is hanging at their eye level where they can kind of see it. And they'll stop and they'll look at it so they have a sense. We'll bring them into that conversation on the weekends, be like, hey, here's what we got coming up this week. And that has also helped so much to, the rhythm's not the same every single week, but it does give them a sense of awareness of, oh, this is what's coming up. And I think then that makes it less scary for them in the moment.
So that's one of the things we wanted to share as you go into this fall. So our line as a family is plan the week, win the day. And I think that's such the shift. And it happens in ministry life as well. I think sometimes we just kind of work Wednesday to Wednesday instead of Wednesday over Wednesday or Sunday over Sunday. And I think for your family, if you would commit the time in the ways in which, like, that family meeting was not just a quick check-in, but like a tactical battle plan of how we're going to allot our time, our money, our dinner, our rest. Like, that's one of the things that we've added.
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah. So
when we sit down and look at the calendar, and the rare event when there's a day that there's nothing going on, or we have a completely free night at home, protected. Like, that's our signal to be like, oh my gosh, look at this. And there's nothing planned. Don't plan anything for this night. Like, the plan is we're resting at home.
This last Saturday, it was literally we got home from everything, and it was like, nope, the plan is we are home from 3 until bedtime, and that's the plan.
And
that is the plan.
and it's such an exhale to say we've been intentional with that rest time.
Yeah.
And thank goodness.
Yeah. And again, some of that saying no to the thing. Okay, so Karen, one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about, this is part of the reason to have you on the show at some point, but we're going to do it right now, like tornadoes and weather be darned, is talking about how your unique experience, I think, has massive relevancy, imminent relevancy for those that are leading in student ministry. So you've been a teacher for 17, 18 years, 15 years in the classroom longer.
Yes, 15 years.
Teaching. And the ways in which that you've taught at high school level, working with teenage students, that's roughly 30 kids a year through 5 to 6 sections most years or so. You have had, so if the average size youth group is like 32.3 students nationally, you have had a cycle upon cycle of trying to find ways to connect meaningfully on an hour-to-hour basis with students. And so I think that parameter of working with that kind of classroom model, the pedagogy of connecting with 16 and 17-year-olds, again, the content you teach, English language and literature, but that environment, especially sometimes for those that are leading and they don't feel like they have a lot of help, they don't have a lot of paras or maybe even parent help or whatever. And so, so help us connect some of the things. What would be some of the wisdom now in your role of like coaching up teachers? Like what are some of the things about that classroom management stuff that maybe we're missing? We have the seminary and the theological education. We have our fun activity degree from working with our youth ministry friends. But the literal educational pedagogy side, like what is some of the wisdom that you would kind of help us kind of lever into as someone who has taught at church some and then professionally for many years?
So I want to start by saying this, that one of the things that you all talk about regularly on this podcast and that you've had so many wonderful people who are serving in local ministry talk about is the importance of the relational aspect of the work of youth ministry, and that's the exact same for the classroom. Because we're working with teenagers, we're working with kids, and it is incredible what you can or cannot accomplish with students when you are intentional with building relationships.
In some ways, isn't that the capacity for how much we can actually be effective? Is the relationship?
It absolutely
that relationship is the capacity for that?
It absolutely is. You can be as knowledgeable in your content area, as skilled in your content area as anyone else in the world. But if you are not prioritizing building relationships with students, if you are not demonstrating to them that you are trustworthy, that you actually care about them and care about their learning and care about what's going on in their lives, then your expertise will only go so far with them. And you really kind of have to face, okay, what do I really hope to accomplish here? In my classroom context, it was, man, I want my students to develop a love of reading and writing, but I also want them to be able to engage with a complex text at a deep level. I want them to be able to think critically. I want them to be able to ask good questions. I want them to feel safe in grappling with, man, I'm not fully understanding what I'm reading here, but I want to, and how do I get there?
That sounds like a lot of our situation in youth ministry, and small group in particular, of an older, complex text that we want them to grapple with more and have big questions about, like genuine, sincere questions, and not just, will I be graded on this kind of questions? So how do you help them? How do you help them engage with something that maybe feels far off from them or distant to them? Because I think that's one of the things in the barrier of teaching or Bible study leading, whether that's small group or teaching to the room, is that you're trying to bring contemporary like connection, relevance, engagement to the thing that maybe is very misunderstood or very unfamiliar. Like biblical literacy is kind of one of the buckets of youth ministry conversation of like, what do we do with kids that rarely or never read this thing that's so very important to us? How do we make inroads?
Yeah. Ooh, that is a good question. So first of all, I think it's really important for those who are in youth ministry to really hone in on what are our goals and what do we hope to accomplish? I've talked to a lot of people who have said that their goal is we want our students to be experts at memorizing scripture. And there are processes and routines that you can guide students through to memorize scripture and to internalize those verses. And I think that that's a wonderful and worthy practice. I've talked to a lot of people who have said, gosh, it's just so challenging to get students to care about the Bible and to get them to understand all that this, sacred text contains. And I think about my own experiences growing up in youth ministry, and I had people who cared deeply about us on a relational level. But then when it came to studying scripture, it was, okay, tonight we're going to look at this passage and let's read it. And then let's talk about what you think about it.
Yeah.
And then that was it.
It was just the read and like, what do you make of it? What do you think of it? Yeah.
And I think that all of Scripture is testimony, and it's meant for us to take and to change our lives and to inform how we live our lives on a daily basis.
And a lot of it will evoke a feeling. I mean, we just spent last few Wednesdays with our teenagers at church talking about Psalms and how Psalms are in some ways these kind of evocation or invitation to feel, whether it's songs of like worship or frustration or confession or anger or judgment. Like that's kind of one of those, like we talked about with our students, like when you don't know what to feel or you're caught up in your feelings, read Psalms, because Psalms kind of gives like a little bit of like a songbook and a pathway to our feelings. But there are some scriptures that are like historical or law or teaching. And it's like, what do you think about, like, how I feel about the Sermon on the Mount may not be the most important thing about the Sermon on the Mount.
Well, and then there is so much to know. About so taking your Sermon on the Mount example, there is so much to know about the life of Jesus. About
that informs
that brings us to that moment of the Sermon on the Mount that I think we actually really care about students knowing and understanding. And so then the question is, how do we get them there? So I hope that in my time in the classroom, that one thing that I became skilled at navigating was how to guide students through the reading of a text. And so there are a lot of different approaches if we look at educational pedagogy and how to do that. But one of the simplest kind of processes that I can think of is 3 steps. And so those 3 steps are...
We love to teach and talk in 3 steps. Yes.
We love a 3-step process.
Do they all start with the same letter?
3 points. But truly, I think if we're talking about how to invite students into the reading of Scripture, but also engaging with it at a deep level and a deep level understanding, that we can. This is one way to do it. Okay, not the only way to do it, but this is one way to do it. And those 3 steps are to activate their thinking, to engage them with the text, and then to extend beyond the text. And so let's talk about activate. Okay.
Number 1, activate. Yeah.
Yes. So we want to activate their thinking, and this can include a lot of different things. So when you have decided, okay, what is the passage that we're going to focus on? Are we working through a particular book of Scripture? Once you decided on what the text actually is for the week or the month or whatever your focus is.
The pericope for my seminary friends.
Ooh, okay, we're going to add that to the word list.
Pericope, yeah.
So when we talk about then activating their thinking, look at that passage and think about what are the potential sticky points for them. Are there terms? Is there vocabulary? Are there words in that passage?
Are there people or tribe names that are often confusing and mispronounced?
Yes. I mean, and that's what makes Scripture so complex to approach with teenagers and with kids.
The history, the people, the biographies.
There are names. There's geography. There is history upon
name changes.
History.
Peter was Simon actually for a minute.
Good grief. There are so many things, which is what makes Scripture so incredible and so
it's a library, not a book.
Golly, y'all. It's just is, and I think you can't help but get excited and get emotional about it when you really start digging into it. But But yes, so activating their thinking. Are there terms they need to know?
Yeah.
Do we need to give them any context to
So
bring
you're talking
them
like
into
prep work, like before
Yes.
we even crack on with like whatever the text is, maybe doing like a word bank thing, the preliminary
Yes.
introduction, maybe finding the short resource or video or
Yes.
synopsis that instead of just jumping into First and Second Kings, giving a little bit of like roadway on ramp of like why are there two kings and the book also has mention of 40 kings. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
why? Well, yeah, let's not jump into Lord of the Rings Two Towers without knowing that it was a full
No.
trilogy. Yeah.
Well, and so like I have heard, how many times have I heard, and I love this descriptor, but that script, this is the greatest story ever told. But if that's kind of what we're approaching it as, golly, we got to get ready. We have some pre-reading
Yeah.
to do here. We have some
Yeah.
prep work to do, and I think that I want to say this about activating their thinking, but also about this entire process in general. Is I want you to have permission, folks who are guiding teens through reading and studying scripture. I want you to have permission to take time, to take your time. I think it can feel there's so much to cover. There's so much that we want to give them
Yeah.
in their limited time with us in youth ministry.
Yeah.
And it can be easy
Yeah.
to feel rushed in that work, to feel like we have to get to everything. There's no way for us to get to everything. And so I think that I hope that you can hear this as please have permission to slow down
Yeah.
and to take that time, because how special is it, or would it be, to also show students in this very fast world how we can slow down, especially with something as important as the word, to take the time and to show them why it's important for us to slow down with it. That, golly, look at all of these things that we need to know before we actually engage with the text.
Well, I think that kind of challenge of limitation is really important for two reasons. One, I think it helps us to focus the effort and the time in which we have them.
Yeah.
Whether you have them once or twice a week, 60 to 90 minutes in person, it helps to limit that focus. But I think it also kind of lays on the table opportunities to connect the dots in between those times.
Oh, yes.
We have talked about it on the podcast a lot, and we just offer it again and again, friends. Like, some of the best tools in ministry that frustrates you are actually some of your greatest assets in connecting Sunday to Sunday over Sunday through Instagram stories, through emails, through Facebook groups, through texts. You're going to have to figure out which one works for your group in the season in which they're in, but there are ways to communicate out and connect dots in between that you don't have to wait for the next talk the next week to do some of that lifting of. You can do some of that pre-reading pre-Sunday to give yourself more bandwidth to focus. I think it's the learning tree of like knowing where to build out the things that we need and to be able to draw the things in. It's so important to use all the tools so that when the time that we have, we don't feel frantic. We can feel focused.
Yeah. And I also think that we have a tendency to underestimate what students are capable of.
Yeah.
And so if we're talking about that, activating like what they need
These
to
are
know.
kids studying algebra too. I mean, you have juniors that are like doing engineering and econ and psychology classes.
Like, I had juniors in high school who would spend their mornings or afternoons at our local tech school taking aviation classes. And by the time they graduated high school, they were ready for entry-level jobs with aviation
They're
companies.
like rebuilding jet engines. Yeah.
It's the truth.
Even your nerdy kids are like piecing together PCs out of spare
parts.
parts.
Gosh. Yeah. It's incredible. Like, and so I think that, one, we underestimate what they're capable of, and I think we also underestimate what they're hungry for and what they're thirsty for. I think that like you may have the reaction of they don't care about those geographical locations that are being mentioned. They don't care about it. I would argue that they do. Well, and I would argue that making them, like bringing them into that rich history and the layers of that in scripture actually will make them hungrier for it.
Yeah. Well, so that's what I was going to say. The activation part, one of the things that you were sharing that I want to make plain is this is a chance to create curiosity.
Yes, yes.
I think sometimes the activation for us is like, well, that's the background work of what I'm teaching about. But maybe it is just did you know that this mountain shows up 4 times in the Old Testament? and then it's like, can you? This is like that trivia moment of like, can you guess which? Right? This is the like again. Gamify the information. Have them, instead of just being like, here it is, receive it, have them go do that pre-work of figuring out like what was this word in the original Greek. Instead of you just providing the Koine Greek for them, have them go do a little curiosity shopping and doing gamify, add some points, put some teams together.
Go on a scavenger hunt.
Yeah, like literally do some read around stuff in scripture, have them come in with some ideas and things. Again, activating, like if you okay, so classroom to gym metaphor, let's get them warmed up, let's get them ready. Yeah, so don't just consider this like the first 10 minutes of your talk.
No,
activation starts before they even hit the door.
Yes. And also, okay, so you mentioned like, okay, the example of this mountain appears 4 times.
Yeah.
Also, are we making that visible for them? I always had this dream in my classroom, and I never did it. But and I never actually watched the TV show Homeland. But there were always jokes about on Homeland that there was like a big like bulletin board, and there were pins and suspects, and they were like connecting string, you know, between them to all those things. Like, what if we did that and made it visible for them? That, oh my gosh, let's trace this, you know, scripture to this. Oh, and look at it. There it is again. Because you taught me the phrase like scripture rhymes.
Yeah.
That, oh my gosh, this thing, you know, appeared here and there it is again.
The line of David again.
Again.
Never skip the genealogies. Yeah.
Oh, golly. As much as I wanted to, I was shocked at how much I loved the genealogy.
The genealogies are tiny biographies. They are trying to tell you stories. Yes. And so, but you don't know that until you kind of build that, again, that learning tree of knowing the names when they show up again and again. You're like, aha, the shorthand. And so in the same way that you love that, don't just share what you've learned, share what you love. And I think that activation is so important. Okay, Karen, that's activation number 1.
Okay, so
what's number
activate.
2?
Then we move on to engage. So then we want to engage them with the text.
Okay.
And that's actually reading the text. So we've activated their thinking. We've made them aware of some of the most important things for them to know so that they can engage with the text at a deeper level. So then we actually get them reading the text. And so the important part about this is that we give them more than one opportunity to read the text.
We don't just read it before we preach and then we're done?
No, no. And we don't just read it with them and say, okay, what did we think about that?
Yeah.
We can read it once and maybe ask that question, but then we need to go through and read it again. And I would even say read it a third time. And that also involves us slowing down a little bit and making space and time for us to do that. There has been so much research done with reading and the reading process that the first time that you read something, our brains are literally just kind of getting we're reading to comprehend.
Just trying to finish it. We're just reading to finish.
We're reading to complete and we're reading to comprehend. So did I understand?
Did it register?
At a basic level? What I'm reading here. And if you do that activation work beforehand, that will go a long way to helping with that comprehension part.
That was the mountain he talked about.
There it is.
Yeah.
And so then after a first reading, 2 questions that I always love to ask my students was, what did you notice? And what did you wonder? So what did you notice? Did you notice that there's that mountain again, or there's that person again.
Jesus keeps saying, "Blessed are the," over and over.
Yeah.
It's like,
I noticed.
Is that like a thing? What is that? Why does he keep doing that?
Yeah, like, I noticed that this phrase was repeated over and over again, or I noticed this, I noticed that.
Yeah.
And then also,
which are high interest, low stakes questions, which is such a dramatic shift of what did you think it meant. Like that's high stakes, high interest. We were looking for the high interest, low stakes where they're allowed to maybe get it wrong because they were just curious.
Yes. And then what's really cool too is that if one student voices, I noticed this, then what often happens is that another student would say, I noticed that too. And so then not only are we encouraging them to read scripture individually, but then it becomes that corporate practice for them of, we're reading this together and we noticed the same things. And so then the second question was, what did you wonder? So what questions?
Yeah, give us a little more lens on like the difference between notice and wonder.
Yeah, so notice is, this is what I saw. What did you wonder? is what questions were popping up in your mind, and that a question may have been like, "What does that mean?" Or "Who's this guy?" Or
what happened to him?
What is
where,
that?
Where did he
Where
come
did
from?
that come from?
Yeah.
And that, to your curiosity point, like that. Then if they start asking those wonderings, that piques curiosity.
Why did the little boy is the only one who had lunch? Did none of these grown people have lunch?
Yes.
Again, we don't have all the specific details in scripture, but that's a wonderful question to hear from a middle school or junior mind.
Sure. Well, and that might give them then license to ask, what was it actually like? 2 loaves and and kind of getting into
what kind of loaves we talking here?
Because really, like they're wondering they're asking those questions in their own minds. And so this gives them space and safety, I think, to ask some of those questions that they're thinking about. And then with the same thing with the noticings, if one student voices this like wondering that they had or this question that they had. Somebody else may have had that question, and then it's like, ooh, okay, I wasn't alone in not understanding that or in wondering this particular thing, and then it becomes, once again, that beautiful corporate practice.
Again, the corporate practice isn't just in the isolated personal response, feeling, or interpretation. I think this is, you wrestle with it too. I think that's one of the things, ministry friend, that like, we don't want scripture reading to just be how does it make me feel or what did I think it's a 14-year-old mind doesn't know what they know or don't know about this, but finding those inroads into wonder, amazement, noticing, and curiosity. What is the nice, right? Noticed, interest, curious, or experience. There's just the idea is that there is more to ask than just what does it mean for me. I think sometimes we get to this highly individualized, personalized, and there are some moments of application, no doubt. That's where many of our sermons and teachings wind up to send us. But the study of scripture that really is going to bring about that curiosity and maybe even that discipline or practice at home, because I think that's the hunger that we have for them, is that they would want to, in between the times that they're with us, be in the Word. That's not going to happen because you kept giving them the thing and telling them what it meant, but creating these opportunities for them to really engage with, explore more, and ask those questions.
Well, and I think that the more, I think this about anything in my life, the more that I feel knowledgeable about something, the more likely I am to share it with somebody else. And so then if we're talking about, if our desire is then for students to share scripture with their peers, with their families, with other people in their lives, will they do that if they're only engaging with it at a surface level and they're only applying it to themselves? Or are we really encouraging them to learn about all the richness that's in there that would then turn them into like mini experts in this for a time, or at least build their confidence in sharing it so that they would share it with other people.
So that was the word that I was going to say, is I think the confidence building. I think sometimes we have them, again, scripture memory is important to recall the rote, the having it in our mind, having it on our lips, but the confidence that when they pick up scripture or someone has a question, we do this, I think, in an apologetic sense of like, what does it mean for our faith? But I think one of the things that youth ministry opportunities provide is the right size learning environment, scaffolding, leveling, that all of us here are about the same age with similar questions, that we can grow in our confidence together. And for your adult leaders, they should have a good confidence to at least impart some of those practices and studies for their students. So, okay, we've activated, we've engaged. What is number 3? Give us step number 3.
So step 3 is extend.
Okay.
So we've built the background knowledge. We have read the text, preferably multiple times. Because also you can discover,
and maybe in fun ways too, right? Like I think not just instead of reading it. Maybe it is read it out loud, read it to yourself, or maybe read it in a pair. Or listen to it. That's one of the things that you always do. Is you love to listen to scripture in the kitchen. Yes.
I also like reading it in the round. Like each person take a line and just like go line by line and read it in the round. There are so many different ways that you can have them read it together, and then to mix it up so that it's not just okay. Now let's read it. the second time.
Listen to me say it. Yeah,
yes. Yeah, there are so many different options there. And so then the third step is extend. And this is ultimately, what is we want students to understand what is being shared in the scriptures so that then they will consider and think about how will this then change how I live my life?
Yeah.
How does my reading of this extend beyond this couch that I'm sitting on with my friends in the youth room? But how does this change my life? How does this change my decision making? How does this inform, how I treat others? How does this, radical life-changing message of salvation and testimony, how does this then
what can be drawn out of the well?
how does this inform my living?
That's good. That's good.
And
so what are some strategies here? Because I think, again, this is where, unlikely connections, because in, the study of American Lit, which you taught for a number of years, or just any of the other classics, this is where some kids are like, I read it, but I don't really get what it means. Like, what are some of the things you do from a classroom perspective to help students? What are the tools? What are the questions? What are the work to help extend maybe what felt like an area of disinterest into an area of high interest or application?
Yeah. Well, I can't help but read scripture and then be changed by it. And I think that it's good to talk to students about that, about this isn't just a book. This isn't just a text. And I think that our earlier steps of thinking about activating that knowledge, reading it multiple times, I think that is so, so, so important. But you might be feeling that, okay, well, this seems very like scholarly or very like, do kids really want to be in school again when they're at youth group? And how does it feel this way? But the real life-changing element of scripture is that it should, what's in there should change the way that we live our lives. And so then, whereas before we may have read the passage once and then say, okay, well, what do you think about it? Okay, well, go out and
good luck.
Go out and apply this week. When students,
blessed are ye who is poor in the spirit, my friends.
And again, I think the intentions there are good. I think that all of the intentions are good. But then, do students feel empowered in a deep understanding of what they've just read to the extent that it then shapes their day-to-day lives? And I know that is what scripture has done for me in that deep study of it. And that I still, to this day, when I'm reading through things, I continue to find new things that show me just how much my life has changed in walking with the Lord and learning from Him. And learning about the life of Jesus and how He walked and lived on this earth, and then how I should then live out and walk my life on earth.
That's good.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes that broader understanding and connection allows us to probe more deeply. Karen, I have one more question for you.
Okay.
This is a little bit on the spot, but it feels right for this audience. So to a group of youth ministry leaders, friends across the country, you have served for many years as a youth ministry spouse and a volunteer leader in small groups, in teaching circles, in worship ministry, and women's ministry. What is something that you would want youth ministry leaders to know that someone who has only sat at the Sunday night dinner and planning family table for 15, 17 years that could know? Like, what would you want them to know?
I think that, God, I said it earlier, but I think taking time, feeling that taking whatever time is needed, first of all, for your families, is so important. I think in ministry work, it can be so easy because the work that y'all are doing is service work. It is selfless work. It is tiresome work at times. I think it can be really easy to fall into the practice of, well, I got to do this at what, like, ugh, this is another good opportunity. So I got to do it. I got to do it. I can't let these kids down. I can't let this kiddo down, like on and on and on and on. But the more time that you give to rest, to your own personal study of scripture, to being refreshed, you'll be so much more effective and I think joyful in your work with those students. But then also that then when you are with those students during that joyful time on Wednesdays or Sundays or any other time, to feel that I know that our time with them is limited in when they are in our student ministries, but it is okay to slow down, to take time, to be intentional with them, with building relationships with them, but also in guiding them through the study of the Word, and helping them to know that we are all reading through and studying and trying to figure it out as much as we can, but that if we don't allow the time for that, then we may not quite get there. And so taking time is good. And I hope that you will feel somewhat liberated in that.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a fun episode talking about ways to take the time, to make the time to engage more deeply with your students. And it's our hope on behalf of the Workun family here at Youth Ministry Booster that you would have a blessed season with your family this season. And we'll see you back next week.
Snap!